right, good afternoon, everybody. We're going to get started. Thanks for your patience with us. Welcome to our webinar event or our Zoom meeting event, whatever you want to call it this afternoon. I'm Allison Ebner, the Director of Membership here at the Employers Association. And we're here to talk about maybe a little bit of a tougher topic today, but I think it's a really, really important one as well. So we're happy to have our partner, John Nettis from PASS, Protective Advanced Safety Services, with us this afternoon to talk kind of to us in general about some of the workplace dangers that employers may encounter today and some of the reasons why, and also maybe some of the solutions that training your employees can offer in response to what we're seeing in the workplace and seeing kind of out there in society at the moment. Everybody's kind of mired down these days with COVID related things. And I think we have to be mindful of the fact that we're here a year into the pandemic. There's definitely light at the end of the tunnel with the vaccine rollout that we're excited about. We're all getting back into our workplaces. Some of us never left the essential worker populations. Some folks are kind of at a hybrid state, and then others are making plans to bring folks back to work at some point through the summer or maybe even into the early fall. With that brings a lot of challenges. Your employees are coming back to you with a backpack, as we like to say, full of stuff, full of some issues. And you know, it's understandable, right? They've got financial pressures. The kids have been homeschooled for about a year now. They're starting to get back in. Maybe there was furloughs and layoffs and general pressure on folks that can boil over into, at a minimum, those microaggressions that we see in the workplace, and at maximum, the horrible incidents like we've seen over the last several weeks with mass shooting type incidents. So please, during this program, if you have questions, just type it into the chat. We're happy to have you ask John questions. He's a wealth of information. We are recording this program as well, just to let everybody know the program is being recorded so we can share it for folks who weren't able to attend today. So now I really want to welcome you again, and then I'm going to turn the program over to John Nettis from PASS. So take it away, John. Oh, you're on mute.
How's that? Can you hear me?
You're good. That's good.
Beautiful. So before I introduce myself, I just want everyone to know that my partner, Steve Grasso, is he's having a procedure done to his shoulder, so he's not going to be here. And anything that goes wrong, I'll blame on him. But if he shows up, just pretend like we never had this conversation, okay? So my name is John Nettis. I'm a retired lieutenant from the Special Operations Unit in Hampden County Sheriff's Department and House of Correction. Part of my job at the Sheriff's Department, where I spent like 17 years of my career in, is working in and overseeing some of the special operations activities. Some of the activities are tactical response, criminal investigation, criminal profiling, canine. I oversaw forensics as well as medical. So it's kind of a semi-autonomous department because it's a county-wide department. So I had the opportunity to do a lot of things. Some of the things that you may be interested in will be beneficial to you in your business. And it's the criminal profiling unit that I worked in, I think would be very beneficial to you as well as a tactical piece. But my wife keeps on saying, John, don't be so humble when you're telling people about some of the things you did. And, when you're doing something over and over and over again, regardless of how interesting it is when you start, it could be kind of mundane, and you could kind of get into like a rut, even if I told you that I used to investigate serial offenders. And that's what I did. I investigated serial crimes, serial homicide, and serial rape, to be quite frank with you. And there's one serial crime that I didn't investigate, but I did have a little experience in, is serial arson. So with those three series of crimes, I got to know a lot of these offenders. I got to know the ins and outs of the business. So I am not even close to being as competent as some of the pioneers in the business, like John Douglas and Roy Hazelwood and Brent Turvey. There's a lot of huge names. Robert Ressler, they wrote books and seminars, but I have been to some of the seminars and I had similar experiences as well as training and education that they did. So the big part of my job with the department was to be a conduit between the sheriff's department and local, state, and federal law enforcement agencies. So we were used as a hub of information for these serial offenders. And if they would arrest somebody that they liked or an unknown subject, an unsub, for a particular crime, then as long as they didn't as long as they didn't get a lawyer, I would be able to interview them. So I think there's a big value to that for you as well. So I can teach you a lot of these micro cues that we use in law enforcement to determine maybe future behavior or past behavior. But I got to be honest with you, unless you have a crystal ball, there's no way. Human behavior is extremely complex and difficult to project. However, there are some things that are static that haven't changed, and those are some of the practices that were the scientific practices that we use in law enforcement. And once we start discussing some of the programs that we put together for you, then I think it'll start opening up a little bit more questions from you. I do want to note in particular, like Allison said, the increase in a lot of different parts of human behavior. Suicide rates are up 35% since 1999. I can't imagine what the stats are now after the lockdown. I'm also the safety director for Agawam Public Schools here in Agawam, Massachusetts, and I'm seeing it firsthand. I'm seeing the small cutting. I'm seeing the threats now on school safety. And a lot of it's rooted in domestic violence. I don't know how many people know that, but domestic violence incidents have increased 30% in the last year. Now, I don't know how many of these offenders who, there's been 7 active shootings in 7 days. I mean, that's pretty significant, 7 and 7. Actually, it's been 9 days. I'm holding my breath. And be honest, I've been hearing, well, I hope it doesn't happen here. I hope it doesn't happen here. And I have to continue telling people that hope is the worst strategy that you can have. You need a plan. So the other couple things that we've noted is mental health resources have been very diminished. It's very difficult to do any type of counseling over Zoom or a webinar. And also there's a measurable increase in drugs and alcohol. So it's very, very important that you know all that. So if you take the financial issues, couple it with the domestic violence, as well as pandemic fatigue with substance abuse, mental health. Now we see dysthymia, which is like it's a mild depression, but still untreated, that can fester and grow. So I don't think we need any more reason to have training and a plan in place.
And John, I think, last year we were dealing with a lot of the political pressure type issues in the workplace. Now it appears as though we've got, people are talking about the violence against Asian Americans that have been happening and things like that. It seems like this is kind of a perpetuating thing. So these are all things we have to be conscious of in our workplaces, right? We've got to really learn those cues to watch our employees and train our managers to do that.
100%, Allison. And then once we start introducing some of the programs, I'll tell you how we develop them, and I'll project for you who it would be in particularly useful for. So the first,
Great.
yeah, that first one, who's coming to work, I'm going to present it to you in a little while, Allison, and it had a lot of opportunity to look and see how our experiences and our education and training will fit into the business world. So who's coming to work deals specifically with domestic violence. Not only identifying some of the sights and sounds and smells of domestic violence, just going over some of the stats that come out and some of the ways that you can recognize it as an HR professional or an employee, because it takes a village. This isn't any one person. This takes your relationship with your staff to feel comfortable enough to approach you with things, to approach each other, to, stay within the team concept. One of the things that we're seeing a lot of, and it usually makes up about 68% of domestic violence, is strangulation. Some of those things you can actually see with, whether it be ligature marks or fingerprints or petechia, which is blood vessels broken around the eyes. I caution people that, if you do see those things, and if you've seen YouTube videos or if you've done any training, some of the ways we pull these things apart is deductively, not inductively. So just because you see, maybe petechia or maybe bruising on someone's neck, that doesn't necessarily mean they're getting beat up at home. What you need to do is you need to understand the whole picture to see how it aligns with each other. So if you've seen somebody with bruising on their neck and petechia aligned with, being hoarse, or their hand shaking, or their voice would be quivering, you start seeing somebody who had great attendance start falling off, using 2 or 3 days at a time. And then when they come back, they're still not the same person. And it's then where you have to start, developing that trust relationship. Not developing it at that particular time, but you have to be so open and scientific about how you bring them in, get their trust, and start, helping them through this process. Because if somebody is telling you as an HR person or an employee that they're being abused at home, then you're obligated to go ahead and do your own investigation, including but not limited to involving law enforcement. The reason why we want to stick with domestic violence is, I don't know if you know, but people are 70 times more in danger when they're leaving the abuser, and the abuser typically knows when this person is at work. So you wouldn't want anybody injured, but definitely you wouldn't want somebody to come in to your place of business and the target would be their wife or their girlfriend or their husband in some cases, and then you're just getting in their way. So you're just going to be another casualty, like we saw in Colorado. They still don't know what the motive is in Colorado. They think they do, but I mean, it's kind of premature before they start pulling that apart too.
Yes. So that's really important to note, John, right? Because I think, sometimes in HR, we don't want to get that involved in our employees' lives personally. I think we're all in a little deeper than we were pre-pandemic, right? Because we've been talking to people for a year now about how they feel. Do they have a temperature? Do you have children that are school age, right? So we know more about our employees, but the fact of the matter is that, A, you need to care what's happening with them, but B, if they've got problems at home, that could come to work with them. And that's where we're talking about these incidents of violence kind of flaring up.
Absolutely. The other piece is this, especially if you have children, even one child, and you're trying to earn a living, you're trying to have a relationship with your husband, and you're trying to keep your child focused on a Zoom meeting all day for 4 hours, 5 hours, 6 hours. That's very difficult when you have other things too on your plate. So self-care is very, very important too. I can't say that enough. Self-care is very important. And we started with a program called the Day After. We have a very competent and skilled counselor that teaches that particular program, the Day After, and it has a lot to do with servant leadership and self-care and self-awareness. So I just wanted to let you know that. And if you're not taking care of yourself, it's going to be very, very difficult for you to take care of other people. So the other thing I want to talk to you about, as well as, let's just stay in the theme of domestic violence. There's other ways to abuse someone. It doesn't necessarily have to be, you're doing it from, in person. You could do it from afar as well. And that's why we're going to talk specifically about stalking and annoying phone calls, and how very, very important it is when you hear that someone is getting a lot of hang up calls, and or if you, as HR people, if you're running Corey's criminal offender record information, and you see annoying phone calls on their Corey, or you see maybe a domestic violence, or you see something that you don't understand. Like, stalking is a very sophisticated type of crime, and there's many different types of stalkers. There's, we talk about 5 in particular, and how dangerous it is to have a comparison between the domestic stalker and a stalker who is delusional. Now, all stalkers aren't delusional, and all stalkers don't have a mental illness. I think that, well, we won't even scratch the surface in the 2-hour training. So these workshops are designed to lay the first layer down, so we have something to build on. And the more we build, the more educated you'll be, and the more competent you'll be at identifying and understanding the risks that we have in the workplace right now.
Want to go next, John,
Yeah, that sounds good.
to the COM program? Okay.
Yeah, the COM program, when I went through the academy in the 90s, we did a program called verbal judo. So verbal judo, what it basically is, it's de-escalation techniques. And I don't know if you've seen any programs on, like, Behind the Wall, or there was a bunch of HBO specials on jails. Well, after working in a jail for so long, I can tell you specifically that your mouth will get you into trouble, and it'll also get you out of trouble. So it's not so much what you don't say, it's what you do say, and how you say it, how you present yourself, and how you position yourself when this is happening. It's called relative positioning. So I think it's very, very important that you understand there's a dynamic piece to that. It's not just, spewing off at the mouth. It's not just bravado. It's just not, you talking over the person. There's a scientific strategy to it. And to understand it, once you start getting used to doing it over and over and over again, it's going to be a part of your life. It doesn't only work in the workplace. It works, when someone in front of you may not have a mask on and is coughing, and you want to tell them in a nice way, or you want to start positioning yourself, if someone else tells this person that you're in a good situation where you can back up if necessary. These de-escalation techniques, I remember the first time that I used it. Allison, do I have enough time to share a jail story?
Oh, of course, I would never stop you from telling that story. Yep.
You're gonna love this one. So let me just build the atmosphere for you. So I'm a new officer. I'm on a 4 to 12 shift. I just came down from the midnight shift, where you go after you graduate the academy. So you pick up a little bit of experience on the overnight shift, but the 4 to 12 shift is where the rubber really meets the road. That's when you take all your skills and your practices and your training and you apply it. So we did what's called a wellness check. On the 4 to 12 shift, if everything is situationally normal, you would do a wellness check every 59 minutes and 59 seconds. 59 minutes and 59 seconds. And if you didn't complete your entire wellness check at that particular time, then if something happened in the cell, then the department's liable, because that's what the policy states. You have to meet that. So I wasn't late, but I did. You have 77 up to 102 inmates in a pod. One officer, 77 inmates. Yep, that's what I said. One officer, 77 inmates. Then once the count went over 77, up to 102, you have 2 officers. So there's a lot of people there. There's a lot of concentration on rule breakers there and people who are much, much better at talking than I am. So when you do your wellness check, you look in the cell, you're looking for movement, you're looking if the person's laying down, you're looking for their chest to rise and fall, you're looking for skin because you definitely don't want them to make a, like you saw in the movies, they make a dummy and they put it in the bed, and when the officer's doing the count, it looks like someone's actually in there. So I was kind of in a rush because I wanted to meet that mark, and I started my ring and I was on the second tier. I counted the first tier, I did a wellness check, and I'm on a second tier, and I grazed by the cell with the lights off, and I have a flashlight. So I shined it in there, and it took a couple steps, and I go, oh my God, am I freaking seeing things? So I go back to the cell, I shine it in there, and there's an inmate with another inmate holding his head like this, and he had a shank to his neck. So you're trained immediately to go ahead and call for a code blue, which means, you get the cavalry there. But if you are the first point of contact, tag, you're it. You better be able to talk a dog off a meat wagon, because if you don't, you're going to complicate things. So the first thing I had to learn and remember is to start controlling my breathing. And that's another thing that we'll get to as we do the overt. But controlling my breathing actually got that oxygen-rich blood to my brain to help me think clearer. Now, if anybody knows anything about the flight, fight, or freeze, a lot of people experience having to go to the bathroom because the blood is going from your bladder up to your muscles so you can fight or run. So I had that going on too, by the way. The other thing I started to do is I started to have what's called ocular constriction. So I started getting tunnel vision. So my vision started getting closer and closer, and auditory exclusion. Like I wasn't hearing everything the way I should. Now I know not to open the door, because if I open the door, then I'll be in harm's way as well. So I had to talk and communicate through the door. Now I can hear people coming. I could hear, there was probably 15, 20 uniformed staff coming, medical comes, canine comes. So what I'm talking about is competing with all this noise, which is making my anxiety more and more. So I'm struggling to, look peripherally. I'm struggling to listen to everything through the door, through the barking, through the officers asking me if I'm okay. And for some reason, because I've done it repetitively over and over and over and over again, I remember some of the buzzwords. How can I help you? I remember to use my tone of voice. I remember to use calm, firm tones. And I remember all these things, and they worked. I got him to lay the shank down, let his hostage go. I closed the door. Special operations came and took him away. This was in the jail. He was released the next day. And guess what he did? He did it all over again, but this time for real. So I was always wondering if I didn't have the ability to use my tone of voice and the relative positioning and using my breathing techniques, if that would have gone terribly for the person that he had the shank up to his throat. And, after I saw him on the news the next day, I definitely knew that I did the right thing. And it gave me confidence. And it also gave me a lot of confidence, too, that I had a good mentor and a coach. And those are some of the other things we'd like to do for you as well. We'd like to coach you. We'd like to coach you like a cop.
Well, I know, John, you talk about this, and you and I have had this conversation about the fact that if you don't experience something through a training, when the situation actually happens, you really don't know how to respond, right? So this is why we have to consider putting ourselves into these difficult situations with these trainings, because we may not have encountered a hostile work situation. even though, 25% of HR professionals have identified that they have worked at a workplace where there has been a violent incident. So, if you haven't experienced it yet, hopefully you never do. But like we said in the beginning, hope is not a strategy. So we have to sensitize our senses sort of to be ready for something like this. And I know you go through a lot of those exercises in the CALM training.
Yeah, that's right, Allison. When we started this thing, we wanted to do something meaningful. After retiring, I said I would never do this again. When I was still working, I went to barber school, believe it or not. And I says, okay, I just want to talk to people. And unless I give them a bad haircut, they're not going to try to kill me. So I did that. And I'll tell you another quick story. I had done some training for Agawam Public School administrators. Mayor Sapelli was the superintendent at that particular time, and he called the department to see if someone would be interested in training his staff in interviews and investigatory interviews. And I did the training for them, and I liked him and he liked me, hopefully, and he asked me if I wanted a job. So it wasn't a week later that I started working as a safety director for Agawam Public Schools. Now, he gave me a long time. He gave me 3 months to do a needs assessment, which I was very, very happy to do. And, schools are different than places of worship and businesses for a couple different reasons. Just to name a few, the structural design is different. The makeup and demographics of the staff are different, and the clients are different as well. So I thought it was very, very interesting that they really didn't have the one thing that I thought would be in place, and I would just maybe expound on it, is a training on active shooter. So 1,028 staff members and 4,000 students in 7 months. Myself and my partner trained. And we learned along the way. We've done trainings with 160 people, and each and every person had come to the table with different life experiences and challenges. And hopefully most of them left without that same type of anxiety in, number one, managing their anxiety, and number two, knowing what to do if there was an active shooter in their school. Now, we're talking about teachers. They didn't sign up for that. And my wife's a teacher. She's been a teacher for 28 years. So she was in the group as well. And they were so thankful and grateful that we did the training. But they were so fearful before we did it. They didn't know what to expect. We told them it's going to be reality-based because that's the only way we can create a critical incident and help you navigate through it. Because what happens is if somebody hears a gunshot, or what they think to be a gunshot, it could be a car backfiring, a door slamming. It could be somebody, hitting a hammer. Immediately, they get the ocular constriction and the auditory exclusion. They don't know where the sound is coming from. So they either run, hide, or fight. And the only way to know the difference is recognizing where the threat's coming from. So you're not running at it, you're running away from it. So that doesn't happen by accident. You have to practice that.
All right, let's go to Hire Right, Fire Smart, because it all starts when we welcome that new employee into the door, right? So this is a program, I think, that serves two purposes. I think HR, administrators, management, we're used to hiring people, and we talk about onboarding employees, right? That means paperwork. That means getting them enrolled. That means doing some interviewing. We're going to ask you to look at this a little differently through the Hire Right, Fire Smart program, and really be aware of some key triggers that some candidates, you may not be looking for this, but that you should be looking for, as they might reveal certain traits and make them not the great candidate that you might think they are. So talk about Hire Right, Fire Smart, John, and how this training works.
Okay, let's talk about Hire Right first. And I did mention, the value of running a CORI or criminal offender record information. And I know HR directors' hands are tied regarding the type of questions that you ask. You can ask the person and not violate their law or the law or their rights. So we took a long time and developed this Hire Right, Fire Smart program. And what we wanted to focus on is we wanted to focus, like you said before, on some of the micro cues. It's not so much hiring the right person, it's hiring the best person for the job. The last thing you want is to hire someone without having everything available to you, including but not limited to the ability to interview properly. Now, as you know, and I'm sure I'm speaking to the choir, that the majority of the way you communicate is through body language. So what we did was and who's ever doing the interview, when, I use the word interrogation, a lot of times I'm like, okay, we don't interrogate anymore. We do investigative interviews with a little bit more firmness to our voice and a little bit more accusatory type strategy to it. Well, not only are you designing the questions, but you're also designing the way the room looks where you're doing this, these interviews. One of the things people make huge mistakes at is having a desk or a barrier between you and the interviewer or the interviewee. You don't want anything to skew what the message is. I'll give you an example. I interviewed a serial offender, and I don't mind saying this. I'm retired now, and I worked on Molly Bish. I don't know if anybody remembers the Molly Bish case. It was a young lady who was abducted and killed at Cummins Pond in Warren, Massachusetts, and the state police arrested someone, an unsub that they liked. They liked the unsub. They arrest him. They're holding him. They called me to interview him. So he didn't, I don't know why he didn't, but he didn't have a lawyer, and I interviewed him for 3 months. 3 months of interview. Now, I used all my strategies. I used everything. I used deductive profiling. I saw the official versions of the crime. I didn't see a medical examiner's report because there wasn't any medical examiner's report. I saw the mother's statement. I also saw a sketch that the Bishes paid for. Now, state police had their person develop a composite of this offender, and then the Bishes paid out of their own pocket for somebody to develop a picture or a composite of this offender. And going into the interview, this was right on the money. The shape of his eyes, the flare of his nostrils, the corner of his lips, his mustache, his hairline, the color of his hair, the position of his ears. So already I'm struggling to say, okay, if this is supposed to be deductive, then I'm going in there preconceived that this guy's the offender. Took me a while to get used to using, dispassion and looking at, just like Joe Friday. I don't know if there's any Dragnet friends out there, but Joe Friday used to say, just the facts, ma'am. So I struggled with it, but I ended up getting just the facts on the paper. I started off, some of the questions were very innocuous. I developed a baseline of his behavior, and then I started asking him examples of some of the things that were happening in the world. And I noticed that he had been practicing on what he said, or what he would say if he was asked any of the questions that I had designed for him. But the one thing that he didn't practice and wasn't congruent with what he was saying is the way he was acting. So I knew I was hitting a sore spot when I saw what he was saying wasn't the way his body language was presenting. Now, it couldn't have happened if I had a table in the middle of us, and I definitely wanted him to confess or give me shreds of evidence where I can take forward to state police. And the other thing that I took into consideration based on our training and experience is we're mirroring what his body language is telling us. And that's also very, very important as well. I wasn't taking my time and writing things down. I had a scribe with me. This person was off and to the side, did not participate at all, but all they did was the whole time is they would scribe for me. And if I was showing signs or a reflection of being appalled at some of the things that I would hear, then they would slip me a note and say, hey, look, uncross your feet, put your hands on your lap, and things like that that actually worked for us. Now, I thought I had the offender. They thought they had the offender. They couldn't pin this on this particular offender. But what happened was, again, he was released and he did offend. There wasn't a homicide that was stopped before the homicide. So evidently, even with all the other tools that were available, we call it a BOP, or border probation, or a triple I. That's a criminal offender record information, not only from the state of Massachusetts, but through the country. No reflection of anything that not even a traffic ticket. So he would have had me fooled if it wasn't for that telltale body language that we're very, very used to reading. And we want to teach it to you too. So we can show you how to design your questions. We can show you how to design your interview room. And we could also definitely give you some strategies in recognizing these micro cues that I don't know if anybody has ever heard of anechophagia. I know, Allison, you like that. Anechophagia is nail biting. And it's just a fancy word for nail biting. There's a couple other things that we like to talk about, but anechophagia, or nail biting, if you start deducing that it isn't such a nervous tic as it is part of an anxiety disorder, or it could even be related to obsessive compulsive disorder. This seems to be one of the characteristics in these mass events, including, but not limited to, domestic violence. So if you were to put a typology together, then if you had 10 people of interest that you actually wanted to interview for potential job, some of this anechophagia is a telltale where you want to start asking them a little bit. You want to start putting a little heat on them to see the way they respond. Like you can give them different scenarios to come up with an answer, and you can see how uncomfortable they are with the scenarios based on the way you designed the scenario. You could base a scenario about them being the interviewer, and what are some of the physical traits that you look for? Do you look for shine shoes? Do you look for good grooming? Do you look for the way that the person is saying things in congruency with the way their body language is? And they start becoming self-conscious about their grooming habits. You'll see them look at their shoes. If they bite their nails, you'll definitely see them sit on their hands. And it was cruel to do when we did that conference, Allison, when I mentioned, I don't know how many people there were, like 90-something people there.
Yeah.
When I introduced anechophagia, I saw a bunch of people sitting on their hands, and I'm hysterical laughing. I don't know if you remember that, but
I do remember that. And I think it's kind of just teaching, HR folks are used to interviewing, but maybe the supervisors that may need some additional cues in terms of things to look for. We talk about behavioral style interviewing. So I think in this training, we go down, a little bit deeper into the behavioral interviews and kind of taking a whole picture of the candidate, right? Which can be trickier these days, John, because we're doing virtual interviews. So we don't get to sit in front of them and observe all the behavioral patterns that you would if you were sitting across the room from someone. But this training focuses on hiring, but it also incorporates some firing techniques, because I know that, I personally have been involved in some terminations that didn't go well. And, it makes you nervous, and you worry about that moment when you're separating from that employee. And then you worry about after the fact, after they've left your property, what might happen. So this training also covers a lot of that as well, right?
yeah, that's correct. I don't know why people are hesitant to call the police when you're doing a termination. I think that's part of the main prescription, having a fire smart type of philosophy towards things. Not only that, but I know it's difficult to manage or monitor somebody's social media, but there isn't a lot of people that aren't going to telegraph what they're going to do before they do it. You're usually going to see some elements on their social media, or maybe they developed a friendship with someone that that works for you as well. And depending on your relationship with them, they will come forward as well and tell you that they had a plan, or um, and all these programs kind of fit hand in hand, especially the piece that we do on stalking. It's very, very important that you understand that, because if somebody has a problem with John Nettis and they don't know enough about John Nettis, what they're going to do is they're going to try to find more about me remotely. They're going to, listen to my voice a little bit more. They're going to try to tap into my social media, or maybe make themselves available at some of the places that I go. So they're going to want to learn a lot more. And for you to have situational awareness that this is happening, you're going to be one step ahead of them. Now, I know sometimes this could be generational, Allison. I mean, I have two Generation X, I think they are, or millennials at home, and it's very difficult to get their attention. Their nose is in the phone all the time, including walking across the street. So have situational awareness. You're aware of everything. You're aware of who's around you, where you park your car, what you say, what you do, what others say and do. And it's very difficult to do if you're not paying attention. So I think I wanted to mention that situational awareness, and that's another thing that we teach.
All right, I want to move on because I know we've got a few minutes left here, and I want to make sure we get to talk about the active shooter training, which is kind of like the ultimate, right? Where you're going on site to an organization, you are covering, you're covering that scenario-based situation where you're putting these folks into a scenario where there is an active shooter at their location. So talk a little bit about the active shooter training, or overt.
So yes, it's again, it's not cookie cutter. If you want us to come out and start talking about this overt training or active shooter training, this isn't a cookie cutter training. If you want a cookie cutter training, or you don't want to spend the money, you can go to a YouTube video. But I can guarantee you that even with this type of reality-based training, it has evidence-based practices. These are perishable skills. So unless you, as a director or an HR professional or a supervisor, unless you are doing these things quarterly, or even tabletop exercises, you're going to forget a lot of them. And with this type of training, you don't want to forget or have a missing piece in it. And again, I had mentioned the breathing techniques that we use and teach you. You could use these. These are applicable anywhere. These are applicable at home, in your business, on the way home in traffic. We employ 3 different types: square breathing, mindful breathing, and 4-7-8 breathing techniques. So this is what I talked about earlier. It lowers your blood pressure. It helps you control your heartbeat, gets more oxygen-rich blood to your brain so you can think better. Self-awareness training, but also the best practices in the event of a shooter with run, hide, fight. We use blanks. The blanks are very, very loud, and it was designed like that. So we have done up to 4, sometimes 5 scenarios based on the demographics of your business, your facility design, and especially if you've had a threat. Now, I could tell you that I've heard of 3 threats that I've been involved in this week alone. And those threats are very specific. It doesn't necessarily have to be an active shooting. It could be any one of the emergencies, including a bomb threat. I urge everyone, if you don't have a bomb threat checklist, to print one up from the internet and put it right by your phone, because this seems to be happening as well. Bomb threats from a remote subject have been happening, and it's just another way of putting you in fear. It may also be testing the water for a bigger event. Reunification as well. Reunification, you want to have the same amount of people if you have to run out of the place and congregate in one area that you started with. If you have 50 employees and this is a controlled reunification, then you are going to have at least two identified around your place of business where you're going to congregate, and the police are going to know where you are as well. So any of these trains, we involve a police officer, a district officer, so they can bring it back to the department. And everybody is aware of what the response is going to be. Excuse me. Police are going to be aware of what your response is going to be as a civilian. You're going to be aware of what their response is as a law enforcement officer.
And I think it's important to note too that, with these programs, you might, be looking for a blend of something. You might say, yes, I'm looking for a piece of that, or, this component of this training. And John and Steve are really flexible. They come out and they do a needs assessment with you. They can chat about what your concerns are, what anything that has happened, if you've had a direct threat or you're just worried about a specific incident, they'll come out and talk with you and do a consultation. They do training for safety teams. They can conduct investigations and also do internal and external facility assessments to see if there are vulnerabilities, which I think is really important for an organization to look at as well. So those are the other services that are offered. So I know John will be happy to answer any questions. We promised you 45 minutes, and I think we're 2 minutes over, but if there are any questions, feel free to type them into the chat. And I will be sending out the PowerPoint with this information about the programs and the contact information. I would encourage you to visit the website for the PASS team if you have additional questions or interest in checking out the backgrounds of John, Steve, and what they offer as well. So they certainly have a wide breadth of experience. So if there are questions, feel free to type them into the chat. I don't know if there's anything else you want to share with folks, John. I know you're getting busier, which I guess is, it's good for business. I'll put that in air quotes, but it's also a testament to what's going on in the world at the moment. So I think that's something to be prepared would be one of the things we can say, right? And suggestions.
And we're a local business, Allison. We're rooted here in Agawam. As a matter of fact, we train the whole school district here. So we're rooted in Agawam. You don't have to have a consultation from someone halfway across the country. It's domestic for you, and we're available. I mean, no business is bad news. So, we'll, and I'm going to take a page from your book. We want to go ahead and expand our bandwidth as wide as we can before we say, okay, all right, we'd have to put it off for another week or so.
Yeah. So, and I know that John and Steve have presented at our conferences in the past, and members have approached them with specific questions and actually called them after the fact if they've had a concern, and the guys have been great about responding and offering that to our members. So if you do have any specific questions or concerns, you can feel free to reach out to them. And if you have any additional thoughts or you want to get in touch with them and you can't remember their information, you can always reach out to me here at the Employers Association. So I want to thank John for joining us today and walking us through the training and certainly sharing some of the things that he's seeing out there in the world as we come out of the pandemic, hopefully. And wish you all a great afternoon, rest of your afternoon. It's beautiful. I hope everyone's getting outside today. So thanks for attending, everybody.
Thank you very much for having me, Allison.
Thanks, John. We appreciate it.